I call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight, will the clerk please take attendance?
All council members are present, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Item 3 is the approval of the agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Please call the roll.
Collins.
Aye.
Duran. Aye. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Tiltonburn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Thank you. Open forum. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the council on an item that's not listed on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next. Consent agenda. Approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that need to be removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, does the council have any questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Duran.
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Tiltonburn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Collins.
Aye.
Okay, so invite Kelsey Doom up, do a proclamation for Small Business Saturday. Okay, mayoral proclamation. Whereas Brookings celebrates local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our community, and whereas 79% of consumers understand the importance of supporting small businesses in their community on Small Business Saturday, and whereas 70% of consumers report that Small Business Saturday makes them want to encourage others to shop small, independently owned retailers, and whereas 66% of consumers report that Small Business Saturday makes them want to shop small all year long. And whereas the Saturday after Thanksgiving is Small Business Saturday in communities across the country, therefore it be resolved that I, O.P.G. Niemeyer, Mayor of the City of Brookings, do hereby proclaim Saturday, November 26, 2022, Small Business Saturday, and urge residents to support small businesses and merchants in Brookings on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. There you go, Kelsey.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
Appreciate it. Yes, thank you so much. Of course, we urge you to shop small on Small Business Saturday. We just got our goodies into the office and we'll be distributing them to small businesses in Brookings. Right now, we actually have a cohort of 15 entrepreneurs and future small businesses gathering for their 9th of 10 weeks of Co-Starters, which is an accelerator program. And we just urge you all to continue shopping small. Our small businesses are the ones that support our soccer teams, our schools, things like that. And so it's just so vitally important that we support them. Thank you.
And then I have another proclamation. Will Tina Bergen come up? Tina is from the SDSU Student Success and Opportunity Center. And this is about First Generation College Celebration Day. Mayoral proclamation. Whereas the Higher Education Act of 1965 expanded opportunities for low-income and first-generation populations. Whereas since 2017, the Council for Opportunity in Education has declared an annual first-generation college celebration in November to celebrate the success of first-generation college students. The passing of the Higher Education Act of 1865, and whereas first-generation students exhibit resilience on their path to earning a degree, and whereas first-generation students and alumni are working, living, impacting Brookings, through their important contributions. Therefore, it be resolved that I, O.P.G. Niemeyer, Mayor of the City of Brookings, do hereby proclaim Wednesday, November 16, 2022, as First Generation College Celebration Day.
thoughts here. First, I would like to give you a poster that you can represent or display somewhere within the building.
Yep.
And it just talks about our event that will be taking place on November 16th that we're excited about. We started our first day of the event of activities today actually over the noon hour up at SDSU. So it was on the market. And so our Student Success Opportunity partners on campus had an avenue of opportunities, and it was our very first kickoff for this event. So we're excited for a week-long of activities where we will be going on and celebrating the successes of students who are first-generation students. So I just would like to share a couple things with you. Our celebration, like I said, will be a week of events, starting, like I said, today for those first in their family to attend a 4-year university or college. And as you had shared earlier, the timing of the celebration aligns with the passing of the Higher Education Act of 1965, which expanded educational opportunities for low-income and first-generation students. Various offices on our campus will highlight the successes of their first-generation students, staff, and faculty throughout the entire week. On November 16th, we will be having a special event at 11 a.m. in the Student Union, and all are welcome to attend. University administrators will be doing a presentation, as well as President Dunn will be doing a proclamation, and our Avenue for Opportunities Information Affair will occur again on that same day, celebrating some of the student support that we have for our students on campus. And we're excited to join forces with the City of Brookings to celebrate this first-generation alumni of the people who work here in this community, as well as the first-generation college students coming up through the Brookings School District. So thank you for having us here and joining in this proclamation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a new employee that Paul is going to present and introduce to our new fold in the employee staff that we have.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, in the audience, it's my honor to introduce Sherry. Sherry, if you'd come up to the podium. Sherry joined us with the leadership team as the public information officer here about a month ago. For those that don't know of this position within the city, it started about 3.5, 4 years ago, and it's one of the most critical positions when it comes to communicating our services, the programs, and most essential information to the public within Brookings. At times, the PIO is the voice of the city. I'm honored that Sherry chose to join us here with the city of Brookings. And prior to working here, she held the position with SDSU as the Director of Career Development. She also worked as the Director of Marketing and Foundation Relations at the SDSU Foundation, as well as taught journalism class and advisor to the Collegian. So please help me welcome Sherry to the city of Brookings.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that introduction, Paul. And I just want to say good evening, Mayor Niemeyer, Deputy Mayor Wendell, and to all the council members. I'm very honored and excited to have this opportunity to be the second full-time public information officer for the city of Brookings. My husband Dave and I are what you would call boomerang residents of Brookings. That means that we have lived here, moved away, and returned. In our case, we returned for the third time about 3 decades ago. So you know that says a lot about our love for this community. And we were fortunate to raise our 2 now adult sons in Brookings. And I am just very honored again and excited to have the opportunity to serve the citizens of this wonderful community I'm blessed to call home. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Okay, item 6E, third quarter CFO report. Eric Grangel, our Chief Financial Officer, will present this item.
Good evening, Mayor, and present you with the third quarter financial highlights for the city of Brookings through the following presentation. Starting with our tax revenue, September. The table on the left is a table that we see every quarter I'll go through it for our audience. And we start with the revenues on the left side, which has the revenue by type. We start with the first penny, which funds our general fund. Our second penny funds our capital improvement projects. Our third pennies our tourism tax, or 3B. And our bid tax is our fee on the hotels. Those are our sales tax-driven taxes. And then the next tax is our property tax. So I'm going to the second column. That's our 2022 budget as a whole. So totally, we budgeted for around $19.4 million of revenue for the city. The third column is our prorated revenue, which means we should be at about 75% of our budget at the end of third quarter. Next column to the right is our actuals. And then the last two columns is our favorable or unfavorability towards the budget, and then the percentage. So the story here is all the way to the bottom as a whole. The city is in a great position, about 17.7% ahead of budget, or $2.4 million. If you look at the chart on the right, this represents about a 15.7 growth from last year, and about 20.1% if we just looked at the revenue, at the sales tax revenue tax. So granted, these are great numbers, but we have to keep in mind that this comes with high inflation as well of around 8%. And then just as a comparison, at the end of third quarter last year, we had around 7.8% growth. So this is outstanding growth compared to where we were last year. The next slide shows a little bit of detail of where this growth is coming from. And the table shows the industries that make out our sales tax, and then our year-to-date revenues, and then our 2022 revenue growth year over year, 2021 and 2020. So it is important to compare it to the previous years to see if there's something really meaningful just driven by 1 year, or are we catching up? So we can see the manufacturing and the transportation and communication sectors kind of like reversing that downward trend that we're experiencing in the previous years, with material growth this year. All across 2022, in the column, you see growth over the previous year, and we see solid growth year over year in the wholesale trade and the retail trade industries as well. So all in all, it's a good story, and it comes from across most of the industries. The only industry that's mostly flat in growth is construction. So when looking at the general fund, and as a reminder, the general fund funds all the key government services such as police, streets, and parks. And this is how we're comparing to budget. So on the left side, we have the table with our departments, our budget, our prorated budget that up to this point, our actuals, and then how much favorable or unfavorable we're against budget. Our percentage of budget used so far, again, which should be at around 75%, give and take. And then we also look at our revenues, because to balance the budget, we need to make sure our income is also coming. Mainly the revenues for these sections are the fees generated by each of the departments. And then that gives us our net surplus. So the story here, all the way at the bottom, is that our expenses are around at 63.4% of total budget, which is about a $3.8 million surplus. If we strip the reserve usage, because that's just a timing thing, we're about 67% of budget. That's about a $1 million surplus in the expense side. The majority of this surplus is driven by vacancies or timing of expenses. I think that the main message here is that we expect all of our departments to be at budget or below budget by the end of this year, which is a great story. And this is a kudos to my fellow employee partners that they've been managing their budget to very wisely, just keeping their expenses in line with their budget despite high inflation. And then the last thing that I would like to highlight, if we look at the revenue side, it looks really good. It looks like we're about 4.8, almost $5 million ahead of budget. And this is because we're recognizing the $4.4 million of ARPA payments this year, as well as just higher fees. And we also had some income from the May 12th storm as well. So on and all, our story is that we're good budget, and we're meeting our revenue estimates as well. The next slide, it's a summary of the other city funds. The CIP is our capital infrastructure fund. Right now, if we take out the bond payments, we're about at 40% of budget with a total spend of about 3.7 million. The pie chart on the right shows what we've spent this so far, and it's mostly the majority is in street and sidewalk improvements, which include 8th Street South on the main intersection, and also the resurfacing of Main Street to Maderi on 8th Street as well, as long as other street work. We've also made some bond payments, police department equipment, and upgrades to the library and parks and the Swiftfield Center as well. And lastly, as a whole, the city is about 54% of their expense budget, which is in a great position as we're closing the year so far. The next slide shows our City Council priority project funding. And as a reminder, these are the unassigned reserves that can be used for City Council initiatives. This priority and the usage has not changed since the last time, so I'll just walk very quickly through it. So we start with $12.5 million of funding. So far this year, City Council has approved $3.2 million of projects. So that leaves us with our third table on the left side, about $9.35 million for funding for priority projects that have not been approved so far. The main two priority projects that are next on the list is the Public Safety Center. Right now, this is an operation 8.5, which we all know that is going to be much higher than that. The next one in line would be the indoor rec facility. So if prices would stay at this level, the cost stays at this level, on the top right, we have our priority funding after unapproved primary projects of $522,000. This does not include any of the surplus that we're generating this year. These are the reserves that we carried over and that we accumulated from our past yearly exercise. Lastly, we have our secondary projects, and we also have a desired project list that at this point we cannot fund because there's not enough reserves for that. And lastly, I'd like to close with a brief economic update of where we believe that we are, and then going into 2023. So at a macro level, after having a 5.9% GDP growth in 2021, as a whole, the G20 economies, which are the top 20 largest economies in the world, is projected to decelerate at about 2.5% in 2022. And they're projected to grow a little bit, 2.1% in 2023. The table in this slide shows the estimates in the U.S. economy. The story is a little bit better than the G20 economy, but you still see some signs of slow down, driven mostly by the economic weakness that's intensified with through our country by rising inflation, like tightening of the Federal Reserve, and the cooling down of the housing market. So as you can see, the estimates right now of real GDP growth, which means you take inflation out of it, and you see 2022, that's the first number that we see almost at the top right. We're expected to close the U.S. as a whole at 1.5% growth, and it's expected to be flat on real terms for 2023. And then locally, the Midwest inflation increased 0.2% in September, with an annual inflation at about 8.1% that we're experiencing in our region. So even though we have very strong revenue intake, remember we have inflation built into it, we are expecting a little bit of a slowdown because the factors that are impacting our economy as a whole are also estimated to impact to some extent in our region. With that, that concludes my report, and I'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions from council? Comments? Okay, thank you. Item 9A, second reading and action on ordinance 22-038, 2023 budget ordinance. Eric, you want to do the presentation on that? Review the item?
Good evening again. Well, we'll start with, as Paul stated in our last meeting, just an overview of the process. This budget is a result of 6 months of work internally and externally. we started internally, probably starting May until August, where internally the city department heads get together, prioritize, propose a budget, and come up with a plan that then in the months of September and October, council, where we explain our budget, our principles, and receive feedback from council. In this same timeline, we approved our property tax levy in September, and we also held a study session in October. We had our first reading of the budget in October 25th, and today is the last. We finalized our budget process with the second reading of this budget ordinance, the adoption of the 10-year CIP, which our city manager will present, and the adoption of our fee schedule that our senior finance manager will present as well. The following slide just shows the summary of the changes between our 2022 budget and our 2023 budget. So as a whole, we're seeing an increase of about $8.8 million, mainly driven, if you look at the boxes, by our CIP fund, which went from $9.3 million to $14.5 million. The main drivers of these are infrastructure projects to improve our city that are around $5 million. And main projects in these are the Second Avenue construction phase 2 for our 22nd Avenue, and other road improvements as well. There's slight increases in enterprise and our general fund as well, and we'll go into more detail in the following slides. So this highlights of the budget, like I mentioned earlier, we're growing it by 8.8%. The drivers are, obviously, we're able to grow it because we have strong revenue growth, which is addressed in the top and the bottom left square. We're projecting 10% growth expected for 2022. Right now, so far, like I mentioned, we're about 16% growth year over year, and we're around 17% better than budget. So you must ask, well, what happens with all these surplus? So at the end of the year, if this surplus stays the same, it'll roll into the city council priority project funding, which then funds other city initiatives that are not currently budgeted. That's why we use that city council priority project table to prioritize those initiatives. The growth that it's projected for our revenue, for our tax revenue, is about 2%. For 2023, this is a conservative estimate and is in line with a possible slowdown of the economy in 2023. This budget also, as I mentioned earlier, includes large capital projects that are their objective is to improve our city's infrastructure. And we also have some staffing increases within the city staff. So on the top right, we are proposing an assistant to the city manager whose main objective would be for infill and redevelopment of land. We're also adding a solid waste equipment operator and a parks technician. The addition of these two positions are a result of operational assessments and based on operational needs. And lastly, I would like to highlight that we've also built into this budget key initiatives, which is our employee development, facility enhancements, and software improvements that increase our efficiency as a city, and it provides a better customer experience when we're servicing our citizens as well. As presented earlier, our general fund, it's a balanced budget. I'd like to reiterate that the general fund funds our essential services for our city. As you see on the left side of this slide, our revenues, our projected revenues equal our expenditures. And then the right shows a little bit of more detail of our revenue breakdown. As you know, we're mainly funded by sales tax. That's about 45% of our expected revenue. Property tax is about 20% of our revenue. And as a reminder, the city receives 16% of the total property tax that any household pays in our county. The rest of our revenue, it's made out of transfer, intergovernmental revenue, and departmental generated fees. The next slide shows our capital improvement plan, and this fund, it's funded by our second penny. In this case, the revenues are a little bit smaller than our expenditures, and that's because we're budgeting to use some of the reserves that we have built in, mostly through the use of grants to fund some of the big capital projects for this year. Our revenues are mainly composed of grants, TIF revenue, and then the second penny, which is about 62% of the income for this fund. In terms of our expenditures, our largest expenditures are the big capital projects that we have scheduled for next year. We also have some bond payments, some transfer out to other departments for their capital projects, and debt payments related to the ICSU PAC construction, as well as a subsidy for the Brookings Health System. And lastly, I would like to reiterate that this budget was balanced based on our city's strategic objectives, our 5 key city council strategic objectives for the city, and this was the guiding principles to prioritize and to propose what we keep and what we invest in the future. And again, keeping in mind our revenues and being very conservative with not overstating them and staying within our means as well. With that, I'll open up for any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions, comments from council? Okay. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any public comments or questions? With that being said, Councilmember Collins, you have a question or a comment?
More of a I think the budget looks great, Eric. I think you guys did a wonderful job with it. I have one issue with it, and I don't think we need an assistant to the city manager. I think we need more entry-level jobs, especially in park and recs. And also from what I'm hearing from some folks within the city, that they believe we're too top-heavy. So I'm going to vote no because of those reasons. Thank you.
Questions?
Oh.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
No, last week, but I know there could be a whole fresh batch of folks listening, so I want to make sure we continue to, I think, reiterate the value of, in particular, the assistant to the city manager position. This council has reaffirmed multiple times the priority to invest, in particular, in the existing footprint of the city, and figure out ways to maximize the use of existing property and existing neighborhoods in the community. How we prioritize infill in existing neighborhoods and existing infrastructure. We've heard from our staff consistently that they are challenged and would be challenged if we continue to put pressure in that area to reimagine the way that we develop existing neighborhoods for both residential use and adjacent commercial use. We also know that our school district is making a considerable investment in core neighborhoods that have been underinvested for a number of years. And so what we've heard from staff is a way to move that initiative forward and complete some of our strategic priorities. And the strategic priorities we've heard from the community is to find a point person that can move those initiatives forward. So this has been a really thorough and thoughtful plan. I appreciate that staff has brought it forward over a number of months. We're right about to cross the finish line. And I think the position is a top priority, along with a couple of other positions that are now a part of the budget. But I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to make a note about the importance of that assistant to the city manager position in terms of moving forward the consistent priority to reinvest in the existing footprint of the community. So I know I made that comment last week, and I wanted to reiterate it this week.
Okay, any other comments? Please call the roll.
Niemeyer,
Aye.
Specker,
Aye.
Tiltonburn,
Aye.
Wendell,
Aye.
Avery,
Aye.
Collins,
No.
Doran,
Aye.
Motion passes. Item 9B, public hearing and action on ordinance 22-035, an ordinance amending Chapter 94, Article 6, right? Yeah. Division 5 pertaining to sections 94-467, 94-469, 94-470, and 94-473 for the purposes of amending sign ordinances. Mike Struck, our Community Development Director, will review this item.
Ordinance 22-035 is an amendment to our zoning ordinance pertaining to the sign section. We'll just go through some of the highlights of this ordinance amendment. Oops. Starting off with signs and requiring some landscaping requirements, and this would apply community-wide to all freestanding signs, regardless of zoning district. And then, in addition to that, certification requirements from the sign manufacturer for those that are displaying lights to make sure that those light levels are consistent with the criteria that are established within this amendment. Then we get into a little bit of the electronic message display signs and their brightness levels, and this is where the criteria we just talked about, where there's a kind of a foot candle measurement that is utilized, and there's a formula that is applied, and that formula is included in the table, so that at certain distances from that sign, you'd be able to measure that light intensity and make sure that the brightness is appropriate for the location and the timing. And here you can see kind of how those, the square footage of the sign, the distance measured from that sign, and then the measurement is 0.3 foot candles, and you use an instrument, a lux meter, to measure that. Then in addition to that, with the landscaping requirements, there's certain landscaping required around the base or the structure of the sign for a freestanding sign, and then also as far as looking at like a pylon type sign, a distance of either to the bottom of the face of the sign or 8 foot up, trying to look at that area of visibility and making sure that there's some wrapping or it's appropriate aesthetics that are applied to those poles to make sure, kind of decorate them, dress them up a little bit. Then we get into our tables, and so within our sign ordinance, we have five or six tables in which we get into pretty specific criteria: square footage based upon zoning district, setbacks, height, and things like that. And so within this table, you'll see a lot of additions there with the inclusion of F and G as additional standards, and those standards are basically if your sign, electronic message display sign, is located within 200 feet of a residential district or a historic district, you would be restricted to 25% of the allowable square footage or 40 square feet, whichever is greater. In addition, there's also height requirements that the height cannot exceed the height of the primary structure or the maximum height allowed within that district, whichever is less. There is an exception, though, is we have intersection safety zones. So within those intersection safety zones, think of it a corner lot, you can't have structures over between 30 inches and 10 feet tall, so that we don't obscure visibility at those intersections. So in those situations, there's an exception that a sign could go a little higher to make sure that we're not creating visibility issues. The other exception is we excluded the Edgebrook Golf Course because that is zoned residential. The Planning Commission discussed and debated this for quite some time. They felt it was important to provide the ability to have signage along the quadrant where the new interchange is to occur. And so that's the exception. And part of it is they felt the golf course is zoned residential, but there's really no residential structures or individuals living on the property. When you get into Table 5, this is just some cleanup language, but essentially is in the current downtown historic district, electronic message display signs are prohibited with the exception of portables. And that's primarily because they're in there for a very short duration of time and then they're moved out. And so that continues to exist, but this would prohibit electronic message display signs being located within any historic district regardless of whether it's a residential or commercial zoned area. And this just is a little bit of a cleanup language to make sure that the 200-foot buffer from historic districts is also applicable to individually listed properties. We have approximately 28 individually listed properties in the community, not all of which are located in an actual historic district. So, previously the distance was 150 feet. We just moved it to 200 to make it consistent with the other language that was proposed. And with that, I'll quick switch over and give you a nice visual representation. So the red items up here are the designated historic districts. The yellow is a 200-foot buffer from those historic districts. And then the blue represents a 200-foot buffer from residential properties. So essentially, where you could place an electronic message display sign without any restrictions is the white areas. And that's kind of where it's located throughout the community. And this is the corridor that we talked about in removing the Edgebrook Golf Course. When this was originally included, it basically only allowed a little sliver over in here. And the Planning Commission felt that there should be opportunities along here. They feel when the new interchange comes in, yes, there's some currently zoned residential property down here, but over time, they feel that it's probably going to see redevelopment opportunities and that commercial opportunities would present itself near that interchange, and they wanted that ability to have that signage available.
Mike,
This,
could you slide up to, say, 6th Street and 22nd?
so this is the intersection where my cursor is, if you can see that, of 6th Street and 22nd Avenue. Pretty much east of 22nd Avenue, the ability to have the electronic message display signs without any restrictions. So the largest sign, individual freestanding sign that we allow in the city of Brookings is 240 square feet. Most of the signage that you're seeing along 6th Street would fall into that 160 square foot area. Once you get east of 22nd Avenue with the B4, it does increase. And so you think of the areas of the Walmart, the Lowe's, those areas. We have regulations in place where that's the maximum you can allow for an individual sign, but it's also based upon your street frontage. So it's kind of a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you have 200 feet of frontage, you would not be allowed a 240 square foot sign. It would be restricted to the 200. So it's based upon your street frontage is another restrictive manner. So with that, I would stand for any questions you may have. I guess I should also note is thank you to Daktronics staff. They worked with us. We had multiple meetings, lots of emails going back and forth. They were very helpful in helping us understand, some of the current sign regulations that they face within the industry and provided some great technical support and assistance. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, close that. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Mayor,
Now, is
I have
there
some
any comments? Please.
reiterate, like Deputy Wendell said, what I said last week on this, or the last time we had a meeting. I agree with the historic district. I think that's a good idea. But I do think this is too restrictive. I think when we get out to the areas of 20th Street South and 22nd Street South, I think it's too restrictive out there, especially, east, west, north, south, especially when we start getting new businesses in. I also think in the long run, this is going to hurt Daktronics. I hate to say that, but I also kind of wonder, I've been on this council for 2.5 years, and I've not had one complaint about this. And I asked, the rest of the council, you don't have to answer me or not, but how many complaints did we get on this? I mean, staff put a lot of time and effort into this. It took them a long time to do this. I mean, I just hope that it wasn't just a couple of complaints and that's why we did it. I want to make sure that we're being fair. Thank you.
Councilmember Specker.
Mike? So just clarify on the blue areas, it's not that signs are not allowed, but they're limited to 40 square feet, right?
Correct. 25% of the allowable square footage or 40 square feet, whichever.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tilton Burn.
I just want said earlier and commend the partnership that happened, I think, both between the city and the private entity that we're fortunate to have here in town in Daktronics, and bringing that expertise to the table to help us develop what this plan looks like. I think it's a pretty wise plan, knowing that the existence of electronic display boards, especially larger size ones, is fairly new. I think some of the smaller ones we've seen for some time in Brookings, but the larger ones that you see that are more billboard size or scope tends to actually be somewhat newer in Brookings. To an earlier point made, I would just say our role isn't necessarily to wait for complaints to come to us and then change rules, but instead put policies in place that prevent those complaints from ever being necessary. And I think that this is one of the ways that we're being proactive about that as the technology kind of evolves. And so I appreciate the time that staff put into this and the partnership with the private entity that brought the expertise.
Councilmember Dern.
Well, Holly took a lot of my comments, so I did want to thank staff and the partnership in bringing those people to the table too. I have one question, and I'm very supportive of this. In the Planning Commission notes, I saw that it was understood that we needed something on the books and that this was very thorough. But it was commented that if there's any pushback or concerns in the future, this could be reviewed again. I was wondering if there was any further discussion on that, or if that was just an offhanded comment. Because that has been brought up as well.
I think anytime the Planning Commission is undertaking ordinance revisions, amendments, there's a tiny bit of uncertainty, and they want to make sure is this the best thing for our community, while at the same time being supportive of the business community. And so they certainly want to put regulations in place that will protect individuals, in particular, with your private residents. But they also don't want to be a hindrance to business opportunities and business growth. And so, want to maybe evaluate this over the course of time, and if they feel that it's maybe not working as well for our business community, and there's opportunities where it could be maybe relieved in some areas that would have, minimal to no impact on residential properties, they would certainly like that opportunity to review it at that time.
Thank you. I think you said that perfectly, that they wanted to be cognizant of this. So I appreciate the work done on this.
I just had one question. I know you don't want to wait till where there's complaints and things like that, but what other ordinance have we done, prior to this one that we've done, that, I can't think of what I was trying to say. I'm sorry. What other ordinance have we done the same thing to? As far as this ordinance and all the work that staff put together on it? How many ordinance have we looked back in the book and said, okay, we need to do this and we need to do this? Just curious. If you know, I mean.
Are you asking what ordinances we've established that we've done proactively?
Yes.
I guess I would need to turn to city staff to ask for clarification on that. I don't know the history of all the ordinances, but I would imagine it's probably pretty significant number of the ones that are established kind of proactively.
I would say that we're constantly looking at codes, trying to evolve them to match the existing community. As a community grows, your codes should shift. Just as Mike noted, you know, the planning commission always wants to have that open door that we could always come back and look at this code specifically. But there might be a change in the future. And it could come from staff, it could come from the community, it could come from the business community. So codes are living and breathing, and we should always be open to having that conversation about changing them to fit the needs of Brookings as it evolves and changes. If I have to pull one off the top of my head right now, I know we just recently did one for residential development to allow for more dense development, to spread the cost of development on more homes and reduce overall cost for the community. Other ones that I know we looked at were residential inspection program here about 2 years ago. Those are just two off the top of my head.
I think another one, and I'm not going to say it was super proactive, but we tried to, with the commercial corridor design review overlay, to make sure that we were putting some policies or guidelines in place to achieve the development that would be long-lasting for the community.
The other comment that I would make to that, Councilman Collins, no ordinance for lighted boards. All we had was for billboards. There were no regulations for these large lighted signs. And so that's something that had to be visited also, correct? Steve?
We've had some, but we weren't keeping up with the changes in technology as quickly as the industry has changed, and so we needed to take a look at that. So we try to be proactive. It would be beneficial if we were even more proactive, but just sometimes we just, I guess the best way to say it is there's a lot of creative individuals out there, and so trying to stay ahead of them to make sure you have regulations in place isn't always achievable, because we do have some great entrepreneurs that have business ideas, and sometimes they can move faster than we can as government.
One more time, Mr. Collins.
One more. I just wanted to thank Holly. Sorry to put you on the spot tonight. I think that's all I had to say, really. I never got a chance to finish.
All right, Councilman Wendell? Anybody else? Councilmember A?
To say before we move on that Daktronics, for all the representation they have had for our city, when they put up a display sign at a professional football stadium or go to the Olympics or anything, we've always been able to enjoy that, and seeing a industry that was created in Brookings doing well and representing us all over. And I think that we have to recognize, and I think we did a good job, Mike, on bringing all the stakeholders of this together, and I don't think anybody feels abused or left out, and I think we have a really good compromise and a good ordinance going forward. So thank you, and thank the people from Daktronics that helped us, and I think it's just a good outcome, and it shows that the things we do at this meeting have consequences, and we always need to look at, who's going to be affected and who's going to be impacted, and this is a good outcome.
Okay, thanks. Please call the roll.
Specker,
Aye.
Tiltonburn,
Aye.
Wendell,
Aye.
Avery,
Aye.
Collins,
No.
Durana,
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye. Motion passes. Item 9C, public hearing and action on ordinance 22-036, an ordinance pertaining to an application for a conditional use to establish a hot mix asphalt plant in an agricultural district. Mike Struck, our Community Development Director, will review this item.
Thank you, Mayor. And 036 is ordinance for establishing a hot mix asphalt plant in an ag district. This is for Bose Construction. They have an existing location on 22nd Avenue South, been in existence for approximately 30 years. I've been asked, how did we get to this particular situation? Well, Bose was originally issued a conditional use permit for their asphalt plant when they were outside city limits through the county. They have subsequently been annexed into the city limits. And they're looking to make some modifications to their existing plant, and so that kind of triggered the need for a conditional use because we do not have one on file with the city of Brookings. And so they're essentially keeping much of their location the same. They're just tweaking some of the equipment. One of the standards that we look at for a conditional use of this nature is the use located in an area where the odor and noise will not be detrimental to the adjacent property owners, and then does the traffic to and from the site travel on residential streets? Well, the traffic is certainly, traffic patterns are amenable, with 22nd Avenue being a pretty major thoroughfare for the city of Brookings. 32nd Avenue provides additional means to get east-west, the close proximity to 20th Street South for internal within the community type traffic. Now, if they're working outside of city limits with the new interchange, it'll be pretty convenient at that location at 20th Street South, but then they also have what I always refer to as the Elkton Sinai exit to get onto the interstate. This is the approximate location of their site. Their existing plant is shown in the boxed red area. That's essentially where they're going to keep the asphalt plant. They're just making some modifications to some of the equipment. Here's a little bit more detailed site plan, kind of showing how the access would come through. And maybe to go back is, if you can see the cursor, there's some access here, but then they also have primary access off of 22nd Avenue. A lot of it is internal, and then there's just, a couple points, one to the south, and then out to 22nd Avenue is how they exit the site. This is the overall site plan, and then this is kind of a drawing showing some of the equipment that they're looking to modify. In conversations, I think one of the big things that they're doing is increasing the size of their drum capacity, not going any higher. Actually, they're probably decreasing in height, but the circumference of those drums is getting larger so they can handle more material. I think some of the things that kind of led into this is, just equipment over time ages and you run into issues there, but trucks have gotten larger over the years, and so how they exit and enter the asphalt plant to receive materials, they just needed to create a little bit bigger space there to create safety for their employees and such. This does come to you from the Planning Commission with a unanimous recommendation, and I'd stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mike. Open up the public hearing on this item. Is there any public comments, questions? Seeing none, close the public hearing, entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second it for the sake of discussion. Any questions and comments from council? Councilmember Wendell.
Thanks, Mayor. Actually, there's someone on hand that could just answer a couple items. Hi.
Hello, Jason Bose.
Thanks. So the conditional use permit process is really the only opportunity we have sometimes to ask some additional questions about operations. So as I noted the capacity increase, I just wanted to confirm whether or not you envisioned an increase in capacity changing any of the existing traffic patterns or the interaction with some of the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the property?
I really don't see that in the next 30 years.
Sure.
25, 30 years or whatever. No, it's, we're seeing some traffic inflows coming, mainly from north of Brookings, are coming this direction. So, improving our access and yes, our silo, that technology that stuff is 30 years old. Mm-hmm. And so, in looking at the third generation now is on board and involved and looking out in the future. We have a design there too. We've got one silo. We're actually have a design to incorporate a second one if necessary. I don't see that probably in my career, but the traffic flows are going to be much smoother, and steady underneath there, basically because these mirrors on trucks get wider, and they all back under. They don't want to drive under. So, does that answer your question?
Thank you. I just noted the capacity increase, and I wanted to confirm a conversation around whether or not you saw that having a ripple effect on the traffic that we see in and out of the plant.
I really don't think so in the near term.
Okay.
But you know, and the capacity really isn't a lot. The efficiency is quite a bit more. The capacity, it's not going to be a great deal, but you know, 20-25% more in peak optimum conditions.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Bet. Anybody else?
Councilmember Tiltonburn.
I don't know who my question might be best suited for, but you had mentioned that the plans that you have in place suggest the capacity for adding a second silo too. Is that right?
Correct.
If a second silo were to be placed there, would the conditional use permit that we're discussing tonight, maybe Mike, you're a better one to ask this question too, but would the permit we're discussing tonight incorporate that, or would there be the need to discuss another conditional use permit at that time?
Well, the plan we submitted shows, you know, a second plan, a design for a second silo, and that's mainly a capacity issue when you get for storage for stops when you're running at optimum. When we're running on a large project, and then a county or a city or somebody wants to show up and take some mix at the same time, because everybody wants it in July and August, right? But so we get backed up, and then we have to shut people off. So efforts to alleviate that would be to create more capacity so we can switch back and forth and offer the same the mix that the customer is after.
I understand the capacity issue there. I think my question is more around local and state policy and how that works and what triggers the need for a conditional use permit to be revisited. Because in this case, the request for the plan triggered a new conditional use permit. So if a second silo were to go up, would it trigger that at that time as well?
Steve, I may need some assistance here. It's a very good question. I'm not sure I could really answer that without some additional research. You know, my initial thought is no, because you're not changing really much of the asphalt plant in itself. I mean, you're adding one additional silo, but your whole plant operation is in existence. I mean, it's just an additional silo that you're storing mix in, or potentially mixing a little bit more material. I don't think that would trigger the need for a new conditional use permit.
I would agree with that, because the language of conditional use doesn't limit it to the or the establishment of an asphalt plant. And so I think that's a broad enough definition to include future improvements.
So if a second silo were established, would maybe to Councilman Wendell's earlier question, would a second silo then maybe change the traffic patterns that would happen along that route?
You know, it's hard for me to say, but there's one in front of the other, so the traffic's going to go the same direction. It's really hard for me to project if there's going to be more or less, or how that's going to work, because we get them lined up pretty good right now.
Councilmember Tiltonburn, is your question more related to traffic on the public right-of-way, not internal to the site?
Correct. So,
Okay.
and not necessarily even just direction, but amount of traffic that would happen on the public.
So like on 22nd Avenue or potentially 32nd Street South?
Would the number of trucks increase if a second silo was there, increasing the capacity?
You know, before we ever make that adjustment, the trucks would already increase. You know, we would wait till we had the capacity problem and use that to alleviate that. And 95% of our traffic comes off of 32nd Avenue. We don't use 22nd Avenue much at all. That's for customers entering and exiting, but our asphalt plant comes off of, to the south off 32nd.
And you would imagine that the number of trucks that would be coming off onto 32nd would be more if there was a second silo?
Well, if there was more trucks, that would trigger us to invest in another silo. At this current time, it's hard for me to say when and if that's going to happen, but we certainly want to plan for growth for the next 30 years. The plan is in place right now. We're going to put up one silo, and the foundation and the footing work, because that's all in there together for a second one. But I don't know when that, I can't foresee that happening in the next 10 years. That's just a ballpark.
Maybe a better way to clarify or quantify this is it's probably more project demand. So as more street work and paving, parking lots and such is needed, it's probably going to generate the potential additional trucks that would be entering and leaving the site based upon the demand in the community or in the region.
I have one more question that's shifting
Yes,
gears,
ma'am.
if I may. And that is, Mike, earlier you had mentioned that when we address these, some of the things that are considered are things like noise and smell, things of that nature, and I think perhaps Councilmember Specker had kind of addressed this last time we met. And do we assess things like fumes or anything of that nature when we go through this process?
So we look a lot more at distance to adjacent properties, to residential structures, look a little bit at the prevailing wind patterns. Now, they have to go through an air quality permitting process through the South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources Department. Used to be Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And that's an annual basis, my understanding.
Correct, yep.
So we'd look at some distances. I believe when we looked at the site, it was approximately from the plant to the nearest house was about 1,400 feet, which happens to be, can I say, part owner of the, or
Well,
owner?
it's the landowner.
The landowner.
He's the landowner. He doesn't own the asphalt plant.
He's the closest, and then the next closest is these two properties here. They're actually under common ownership. One has an accessory building on it, and then the house itself is approximately 1,800 feet from the asphalt plant. But we don't have specific distance requirements written in our zoning ordinance at this particular time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Specker?
Yeah, I looked up the air permit application for the state, which doesn't really, I mean, all it does is essentially you're registering the equipment that's used. So there's no monitoring along with that. Do you monitor any emissions from this plant?
We get tested, we follow those regulations. We do not ourselves monitor that, but we do get inspected. We have somebody comes out once a year and tests that. I think we had that done recently. I believe, I'm not up to speed on that. We've never had any issues.
Okay. I wasn't aware the state did that, but thank you.
Yep. We meet all the environmental regulations. It's,
Miranda Peterson, partner and Vice President of Bose Construction. So yes, the answer is yes. Dated September 13th of 2022, we have emissions, visible emissions observation forms. So that is done annually. We have them from last year.
So when you say observations, are they actually measuring anything?
They are, yep, and that's part of the application that we have to submit in. They have all of the actual printouts and it basically shows that it's water vapor that is coming off. So that steam that you see coming out of the stack.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the steam.
Yeah, well, so we have, to answer your question, yes, every year, and we have the results of that. And they are submitted with the permit to the Department of Agricultural and Natural Resources, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Councilmember Avery.
Just a question for Mike or a comment. When you look at that map, it looks like, I can't imagine there's any place that that plant could be that's any farther away from anything that would bother anybody. I mean, it's just, it's right in the middle of a piece of land where we've got a significant buffers all the way around. So have we ever had any issues, any complaints, any problems there that you're aware of?
We have not received any complaints in our office.
Councilmember Wendell.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a question for the applicant. I think maybe what you're recognizing, though, or maybe the applicant is experiencing, is some concern that's coming up in our conditional use permitting process. And I think that's probably what this has bubbled to the surface, at least for me. I had made some of these comments or asked questions last week to make sure I understood how we manage conditional use permits in Brookings and how we have historically managed conditional use permits. And, you know, frankly, and this maybe speaks to the earlier topic around looking at ordinances in a proactive way before we're asked to apply those ordinances to a current day situation. And this is one that, frankly, in the years I've been on the council, I've not spent a lot of time examining, because most frequently it seems like when we're considering a conditional use permit, it's a beautician that wants to put a styling salon in their basement, or a woodworker that wants to put a shop in their garage. And if we don't get complaints from a neighbor, we just kind of move forward and not revisit. I think larger scale commercial level conditional use permits, we also don't have a mechanism to ever revisit. And I think this one has demonstrated for us that it's been in place for 30 years, and there's never really been a mechanism to learn any more about the process or when it was initially granted and any updates along the way. And so some of my questions or my concerns are more related to the way we handle conditional use permits in Brookings. And I don't want to see us slow down the approval of this particular conditional use permit, but I would like to see us investigate what our long-term planning is around conditional use permits, and if it makes good sense for us to build in a mechanism where in the future, if we approve a conditional use permit for a large-scale project, that somewhere in there's a mechanism that we can revisit that as a city. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm not suggesting language that's prescriptive. This particular situation just allowed me to dig a little bit deeper and understand that maybe this is a bit of a hole in the way we manage our permitting process, and might lead us to do some digging around that, and in the future implement some changes or some language around our ability to revisit the conversation with conditional use permit holders. Because if I understand correctly, based on the questions I asked last week, there really is no mechanism in place in Brookings right now. If you're granted a conditional use permit, it lives on in perpetuity unless you sell that property, right?
Unless we've specifically limited the duration or imposed conditions that were timed to, the usage, basically.
And I'm glad you brought up that point, because I also understand that for an applicant, a challenge related to a project like this is a considerable capital investment. So if we're granting a conditional use permit that also has a considerable capital investment, I think we'd be hard pressed to say we're going to revisit this in 2 years. You know, I think that's a hard message to deliver. So I'm not sure that makes good sense either. I just want to do a little bit more thorough investigation in how we implement conditional use permits in the future. I think some of the questions we've had for the folks at Bose have been related to just trying to understand what this looks like for large scale projects that have a 30, 60-year lifespan.
Okay.
I would just echo those sentiments. Many of my questions weren't necessarily before us tonight, but rather a better understanding of the process and understanding what triggers the revisiting of conditional use permits. So in this case, it was because there's a large-scale project that's going to be taking place that alters the use of the original conditional use permit. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, the city never issued a conditional use permit. It was issued by the county, and then it was annexed in. So that original conditional use permit was issued by another governmental entity, not the city of Brookings. So that's kind of what triggered it.
So, and this is really getting in the weeds on this topic, but was it the annexation that triggered it, or is it the bringing forward of the new?
It was bringing forward of of a new project. If they didn't choose to expand or remodel or renovate the existing plant, it would just continue as is, as a non-conforming use that was brought into the city limits at the, through the annexation process. So I think the other thing I would say is, as far as revisiting conditional use permits, the time to revisit them is if they're not in compliance. So if a conditional use permit is issued and somewhere along the line they're not following through with the conditions, that certainly we could have the ability to revoke that permit at that particular time if they're not complying with those conditions that were part of the approval process.
So I think you make a really good point there, Mike, and I think that's part of the reasoning of some of the other questions that were asked again around the process, and that is, what are the conditions that we place on it, right? Like, does it deal with fumes? Does it deal with smell? Does it deal with just setbacks? I think these are a lot of questions that the council has that we just, because we don't often see conditional use permits on businesses this size and scope, we just don't, we haven't had those questions and haven't needed to kind of assess some of those things. So just a better understanding of what that looks like in a fuller picture, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah, and you bring up very good points, because I was kind of going back over time, and I would say at best we're maybe 5 conditional use permits on an annual basis. And I think Councilmember Wendell kind of spoke to it, is it seems like a lot of those are more home occupation or residential related conditional use permits, where those are there's a little bit more specific criteria, because you look at, is there employees that live outside of the house that would be coming to that location? Is there increased traffic that's generated by the use that's being established? The hours of operation, because those are things that, with the home occupation, the primary purpose of that particular district or that area is for residential reasons. And so when you introduce some business into that, that comes with maybe a little bit more criteria. When you get more into a commercial setting or industrial type setting, we could certainly take a harder look at some of those. I think the one thing that you have to be cognizant of is, are they quantifiable measures? So like, smell is pretty subjective, and we'll find out the results of a referendum in Sioux Falls, later tonight or tomorrow about potential smell. But it's making sure that you have the instrument or tools in place that you can adequately monitor those and quantify them, rather than being a subjective test. And so
one example would be a violation of a state or federal testing.
Yep.
And are there many others, if any others like this, where the conditional use is kind of grandfathered in due to annexation that we have within the city of Brookings? And I don't feel pressured to actually answer that now. I know that's probably hard to just pull up, but I think that is like part of the conversation, right? And just better understanding of what that looks like within the city. And I also want to just take a moment to apologize to the applicant for kind of bearing the brunt of this conversation that is not necessarily specific to your application, but rather just a broader scope discussion around a topic that we don't often get to visit. So sorry for kind of bearing the brunt and standing there through this.
All right. Council have any other questions, comments? Anytime, I know you have quite a few operations on the east side of the interstate. Do you ever see in the future of moving your operation to the east side at all?
Down the road, I can see that happening. We've examined this, this is a big project for us, and we examined a lot of different avenues, and, we just seen that maybe it's a little too soon with that interchange coming in, and the land that's along there. There's opportunities along there that I don't know, sometimes if you don't have the answer, you stick with what's working, but yeah, eventually I could see it moving to the east. I don't know when that would be.
Thank you, Jason. Any other questions, comments?
Tilden Burn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Collins.
Aye.
Duran.
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Okay, item 9D, public hearing and action on annual liquor and wine alcohol license renewals. Bonnie Foster, our city clerk, will review this item.
Mayor, council members, and members of the public, this is a required public hearing as stated in state law for liquor and wine license renewals for licensed establishments which have failed an alcohol compliance check conducted by the Brookings Police Department within the past 12 months. There are 9 establishments on this list. Following this required public hearing, City Council action is required for the renewal of these licenses. If approved, they will be sent to the South Dakota Department of Revenue for final review and issuance of the licenses for 2023. Staff does recommend approval.
Open the public hearing on this item. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, entertaining a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Any council questions or comments on this item? I have one, Bonnie. On all of these establishments that are here, did they only get dinged once?
Yeah, if it's more than that, there's additional state law. This is a first offense for
Right.
all of these 9 establishments.
Okay. Councilmember Wendell.
Can I ask a clarifying question? First offense in this calendar?
In general, none of these are on our previous 5-year list.
Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have more of a comment, I guess. I can't believe that nobody showed up to say sorry or anything like that. And I mean, what are we voting on here, Bonnie?
You are voting on that you are comfortable issuing their liquor and wine license for the 2023 calendar year, despite the fact that they have their first offense of an alcohol compliance check. We understand when those are conducted, it's to make sure that they're operating their business within the confines of the law. And usually the punishment, I believe there's a fine that the established has to pay, as well as a ding on the employee that sold the alcohol to a minor or was in violation of state law.
Thank you,
Any
Bonnie.
other comments or questions? I got one comment. I was discussing this particular item with Bonnie earlier this week or last week, and we had a bar owner in here last year when we were reviewing renewals from last year, and he was sitting in the back. I went to talk to him later, but he was holding a money bag, and it was full. It wasn't full of money. It was full of fake IDs that they had taken away from people that were trying to get into the bars. So I have to commend some of these bar owners here trying their best to make sure that they're not serving minors. And I just wanted to point that out. He was thinking he may have to come before us if we start questioning whether or not we were going to renew his liquor and beer licenses. And so I want to give a little bit of heads up that they've only had one violation, and so I think our bars and restaurants do the best they possibly can, but it's pretty tough out there anymore from what I understand with the fake IDs, and Officer Job in the back here could probably attest to that also. So with that being said, please call the roll.
Wendell?
Aye.
Avery?
Aye.
Collins?
Aye.
Duran?
Aye.
Niemeyer?
Aye.
Specker?
Aye.
Tilton Burn?
Aye.
Okay, on to item 10A, action and resolution on 22-087, adopting the consolidated fee schedule. Ashley Wrench, our senior finance manager, will review this item.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. This is Resolution 22-087 schedule. The consolidated fee schedule is adopted each year in conjunction with the budget process, and updates are also made periodically during the year to ensure that fees are comparable with peer communities and appropriate in terms of cost recovery and other strategic objectives. The resolution before you includes a variety of fee schedule changes that are across the entire organization, the majority of which were previously presented in detail as part of our second budget workshop. The changes include increases for airport hangar lease fees, public records requests, code enforcement investigations, landfill material fees, building permits, aquatic center admission, park and rec facility reservations, including camping and community gardens, preliminary and final plats, rental licenses, and a new fee for zoning verification letters. This resolution also includes a comprehensive update to Edgebrook Golf Course fees and a new fine for non-electric vehicle parking in electric vehicle-only parking stalls. The details of these changes have been included for review in the council packet for this meeting, and with that, I'll stand by for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ashley.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, does the council have any questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Avery,
Aye.
Collins,
Aye.
Duran,
Aye.
Niemeyer,
Aye.
Specker,
Aye.
Tildenburn,
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Okay. Item 10B, action on the 10-year capital improvement plan. Paul Persino, our city manager, will review this item for us.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members. The capital improvement that contains all expenses roughly over $25,000 for departments and other community projects. The primary revenue source for the capital improvement plan is the second penny, as well as other revenue sources. The plan includes year-to-year equipment, fleet, and facility maintenance, repair, replacement for city operations, and it contains approximately $114 million for 2023. The plan also includes funding for outside agencies and capital commitments and debt service as well. The presented CIP is balanced through 2032 as a result of prioritization, strategic project timing, and cuts, and utilization of carryover reserves, as you'll see in the first few years. At this time, the CIP does not include, however, the debt needed for the police department facility, and once the costs are known, the adjustments will need to be made for the 2023 CIP, but that'll occur probably sometime next year through the process. In September and October of earlier this year, this plan was presented in greater detail by Jake and staff. At the end of the day, staff does recommend approval of the capital improvement plan as presented to City Council.
I entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, please, or does council have any questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Collins? Aye.
Duran,
Aye.
Niemeyer,
Aye.
Specker,
Aye.
Tildenburn,
Aye.
Wendell,
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 10C, rubric prioritization of 2023 social service outside agencies. Heidi Gullickson and Paul Persino will present this item.
And every year we'll make sure
That I
that
stump
item.
on that.
Annually, the city grants funds for our social service agency partners throughout the community of Brookings. For 2023, the city council budgeted $252,480, which is an increase from 2022. This fall, United Way will accept social service agency applications, and within the community of Brookings, any agency can apply for the United Way and city funding through this shared process. Application, a rubric, and city council priorities to provide a recommendation back to City Council. The council will then provide a final approval for all allocated funds in February of 2023. At this time, the City Council prioritization areas for funds will assist in determining the rubric. The committee will go through later. The areas of specific significance that council's had in the past include health, youth development, affordable housing, diversity, government stewardship, safety, transportation, and transit. This time, staff does recommend prioritizing health, specifically within health, food access, and mental health, as well as youth development for 2023. And those are based on conversations that we've had of community needs throughout Brookings. And Heidi's here to speak on this process and this recommendation as well, should you have any questions.
Heidi Gullickson with the Executive Director. Happy to be here again to answer any questions and just kind of talk through the process. The applications are currently open. They'll be due at the end of November, early December. Our board members will then get together and review those applications and do the scoring. And then those dollar amounts will be allocated based off of that scoring. When Mr. Persino talks about the health, the food access, and mental health, and the youth development, I agree that all of those priorities up there are good priorities, but at some point you have to kind of say what's going to rise to the top right now in our community, and through conversations that we hear and that we've had with you guys and from our partners and community members, the food access and mental health and youth development, like Paul said, have kind of risen to the top this year. So that is kind of our conversations previous to now that we've had. Our process is here, and we are happy to assist the city in bringing this information in a clear, concise manner to you guys.
I would further note that earlier this year, council did designate roughly $2.2 million of ARPA dollars for outside agencies within the community. That would not prevent those agencies to continue to submit to this application process as well.
Okay. I'm just going to throw to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item? Does council have any questions or comments? Councilmember Tilton Burn.
I have two questions. Heidi, my first one's for you. As you go through this, and I think you've answered this for me in previous years, but I just want to verify that this is still kind of how it happens. But as you go through this process, are the applications and the discussions around the applicants that are requesting the city dollars, are those handled separately in discussions, or are they concurrent discussions from those that are requesting United Way funding?
They may happen on the same night, but they are two separate groupings of conversations.
So then my second question, I don't know if it's for Heidi or Paul, but I'm wondering in some similar scenarios that involve the city, there's often one or two city council members that sit in on some of the conversations around the recommendations that would come forward to council. Have we ever considered having one or two city council representatives that would sit in on the discussions to help be a representative in that, both to maybe help give some insight as to the priorities, but then also to report back to the council how the process went?
Sure. In the past we had looked at that, but since then I've reviewed the governance and ends policy. Within the governance and ends policy, specifically under the city management portion, it notes that the city manager will provide recommendations. So to do that really would not be following the governance and ends policy, or not the governance and ends, the actual city charter. The states that the city manager will be making recommendations to the city council. It'd really be city council members making that recommendation. Now, if council wants to find out more of the process, I'd encourage you to visit with Heidi to understand that process before. But otherwise, I could see that as a potential violation of the city charter.
So can you help me understand how that might differ from, say, conversations around economic development recommendations where city council members do participate in that, or joint jurisdiction conversations where city council members do participate in that, and others that are similar in nature?
Sure. So specifically within the city charter, under the city manager section, it does note in the city manager section, the city manager is responsible for providing all proposed budgets to the city council. So in doing so, I'm requesting Heidi to provide me that proposal so I can provide it to you on behalf of the city manager. So to do that, therefore, I would have to have Heidi do that. To have the city council do that as part of that process would be potentially violating, at least in my mind, that section of the city charter. Now, the charter doesn't talk to joint jurisdiction or any of those other committees, so that would be outside the purview of that process.
So you're suggesting that the way the charter is written would prevent us from having a policy in place where two council members would sit in as representatives on the committee?
Correct.
I would maybe ask Steve, would you agree with that interpretation?
Proposing the budget, it is a component part of proposing the budget. If the action of attending those meetings and making recommendations, I would think would be part of the budgeting process. So that really is kind of assigned on in the charter to city manager. There are no restrictions in terms of your involvement and attendance, at any community events to inform yourself to do the job of city council member. So to participate, but actively getting involved to steer the discussion or make recommendations within that process, might be not contemplated by the way the charter is structured in terms of the budget aspect of it.
And that's where I'd go back to, if you have an interest, maybe sitting down with Heidi, going through that process.
Sure. Thank you.
Councilmember Dern?
I just want to reiterate to the public from this process at United Way, even though they are my employer. So just want to say that every time I vote on something United Way based.
All right. Please call the roll.
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Tiltonburn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Collins.
Aye.
Okay, that pretty much takes care of the business tonight. City council member introduction of topics for future discussion. Anybody got anything on their mind?
I have one.
Councilmember Wendell.
There might have been I would like for us at some point to revisit the conversation around conditional use permits. I don't necessarily have a timetable. I'm not saying 2 weeks from now I want us to have a thorough look at that, but I think just based on the conversation we've had over the last 2 weeks and again tonight that it would be worth some examination. And one of the things that tonight's conversation made me want to be sure we included were if there are other regulating bodies that impact the decisions we make locally on our conditional use permits at the state or the federal level, I just want to make sure that we understand clearly if there are existing state statutes that limit what we can do with a conditional use permit, and what, if we put a mechanism in place that we're going to revisit a conditional use permit that's already been granted, what does that actually look like and what might trigger us reevaluating the permit? So I think it could be a pretty all-encompassing conversation, and I don't have a timetable attached to it necessarily, but I think it'd be valuable.
Councilmember Tilton Burn.
I was just going to say if that is, if that's on the table as a motion to include in a future meeting, I would second that, and I would maybe expand on that. Some things that I think would be worthwhile of the conversation would be to note whether or not we do have any other scenarios where individuals or businesses have been kind of grandfathered in through annexation, similar to the one that we visited tonight, and then also better understanding what it is, what conditions are placed on conditional use permits. What are we looking at? What are the conditions that we're placing on them?
I don't know if we need a motion on this as much as a consensus as to have Paul and Steve visit this item for us and maybe recommendations of what we could do in the future with it. Fair enough? Any other questions, comments, things you want to bring up? Okay, review November 15th meeting. We have study session. There might be possible action. Joint city-county committee meeting, joint jurisdiction ordinance. City council action, possible city or county commission action on it. And then city council and county commission joint first reading.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, sir.
You noted at the study session there may be potential action.
Do action on that resolution. Reading. We're basically the two groups of whether or not
Sure.
we agree on it, and then
Yeah.
there'll be a first reading that night.
Okay. So we're able to take action at a study session.
Well, it's study session / action meeting.
We've just categorized it differently. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
It'd be a formal meeting to consider that ordinance.
Okay, and then November 22nd meeting. That. At now, we don't have any first readings. We will be getting reports, hopefully, from our ex officios from BMU and the hospital. And Bonnie and I talked about this a little bit. I know that the BMU board meeting is in the early part of the month. The hospital meeting's what, once towards the end of the month? Yeah, so
It's the last
maybe,
Monday of the month, Mayor.
so that isn't always going to be the second Tuesday. So we possibly could have both the ex officios on that first Tuesday of every month then, Bonnie. I think that's what we'll do then. If everybody's comfortable with that.
BMU meeting this month is next Monday, I think.
Right.
This coming Monday, yeah. That's my Monday to go, Bonnie, so you could stay home.
And then other comprehensive plan amendments, land use map, initial development plan amendments, and then progress report from the assistant city manager. That being said, we're going to go into executive session. There will not be any action held after executive session. We enter into executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2.3 for consulting with legal counsel and reviewing communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters, and SDCL 1-25-2.5 for discussing marketing or pricing strategies by a board or commission of a business owned by the state or any other of its political subdivisions, when public discussion may be harmful to the competitive position of the business. Entertain a motion to enter an executive session.
So moved.
Please vote by voice.
Aye.
Motion passes. We are in executive session.